Hey everyone, in this episode of our first person narrative tutorial, I'm going to be going over how to use the interactive object framework that we've set up so far to create doors. So I know a door sounds straightforward enough, but there's a surprising amount of design considerations that we'll want to think about, and I'll just bring them up as we go. But to get started, let's go ahead and go to our design document here. Actually, here's a zoomed in one already open. And check out the section about the door so we have an idea about what we're trying to make. So my philosophy with design documents is to keep them short and sweet, because if they start to get long and complicated, people won't read them, and if people don't read them, they're not very helpful. So I like to have just the name of the feature here, a very simple description, and then just sort of a bulleted list, or maybe you can use a numbered list if you're describing a sequence, or maybe even a little storyboard to sort of as plainly as possible describe exactly what the feature does. So this is what we're going to be building. When the player looks in an interactive door, the display text will show an appropriate message. Remember, our display text is this text that shows in the center of the screen when the player is looking at something. So just in case you forgot, you can kind of see. All right. Then, when the player interacts with the door, and I can even make this more clear, when the player interacts with the door by pressing the interact button, it plays an open animation and a sound effect and no longer blocks the player. The door can only be opened once, after which it is no longer interactive and should no longer trigger display text when looked at. Now, this is where I'm going to start, and the reason both of these things are true is just to make our life easier as developers. And once we have this in place, if we decide it's worth it spending the extra effort to make a fancier door, we can expand on it. But this is going to get us to the simplest door that still shows off an animation. And so swinging doors will swing away from the player, so the player is not bumped by the door as it opens. All right. If you bump the player with the door, you can have crazy stuff happen, like bump them through walls, and it's just generally disorienting. So I'll show you an example when we get to that point. So let's go back to our Unity project and start thinking about adding this door feature. First of all, I want to enlarge my plane that I have here, just to have a larger area to work with and test things. And I noticed that when I made this plane, I made the geometry needlessly complicated. There's all these different segments, so rather than select them all and scale it, I'm just going to actually just delete this plane and make a new one that's easier to work with. So I'll hit Control-Shift-K, and you know what, we can just leave it as a cube, and let me get it up to the correct height. Oops, make sure you're on your object selection here. Let's bring this thing up. Maybe we should actually put it at 0, move everything else to match that. And now let's just select the sides. I'm going to get a top-down view and go into orthographic mode and just sort of get on ProBuilder, every 10th unit is the bold hash mark, so this would be 10. This is on a 1 meter grid, so that's 10 meters. I'm going to get a 20 meter little work surface here. Let's see if I can select that face, go back to the top down view, drag him out to there. Let's grab this side face, go back to the top down. You can click the axes to get a view down that axis, and then if you use the isometric view by clicking this so that there's 3 lines here, you'll have it very easy to line up with your grid. So I'll get that, and now I just need to get this last face here. Again, let's look down the y-axis. There we go. And pull it out. Cool. Alright. So this is a much, in my mind, easier to deal with test area. I want to get all my other stuff back on the ground, which it is not at this moment. So what I will do is I will select these things and the player and just move them down, although I'm not sure where my movement handle is. I guess I can do this, click and drag. Oh, that doesn't snap for me, so that's not good. So let me just try this again. I will select these items, and maybe I selected the canvas earlier or something that really gave me a crazy move handle. Oh, and let's make sure we're in object mode of Pro Builder here so we don't mess our geometry up. And there we go, that should be good enough. As long as our player is not through the ground, you always want to make sure the player's, if anything, a little above the ground so that gravity pushes him back down. Otherwise, you can fall through the floor. Alright, let's just run the game, make sure I didn't break anything. So we can toggle the donut. This one is only used once. Alright, seems like we're doing not so bad. Now, the next thing I suppose we should do is use Pro Builder again to create our door frame. This is one of the nice things about Pro Builder. If you just hit Control-Shift-K to get the shape tool going, you can select from this drop down door, which is actually more of a doorway or door frame. I'm going to leave the default settings here. You can always adjust it if you want. Guess I should bring this into the view. There we go. I am going to leave the default. If you can already tell this is not going to work for you, feel free to adjust it a little, but I'm going to just hit build. And here's our door frame, that is. And I just realized also I forgot to, when I built this new floor, I've just left it named cube, and that's confusing, so let's be careful and rename it to floor. And at this point, why don't we actually save our scene? And what I'm going to do to help us sort of get used to working with version control, I always think it's a good idea to make new test levels by hitting File, Save As. And this way I'm not actually overwriting the current scene in case someone else would happen to make a change in that scene. I'm just going to make a new scene, and we'll call it door test. So this is our door test scene. Make sure you save it in your scenes folder. Okay, so before we get carried away with this door, I think we should run our game and make sure it sort of feels appropriate for our player. You know, if we select a player here, you can kind of see they fit through the door. Generally in games, you want to have doorways pretty much too big seeming. You don't want to make your door like, you want it to be a little larger than is realistic, especially for a first-person game, so that when you try to path through it, it looks easy, you don't get hung up, and it's just the way the camera perspective is. Oftentimes it just is easier to have a little bit larger of a door than you would have in real life. Now, for me, this kind of feels a little tall if I was trying to make this like a house or something, but maybe it's okay. So just check out your door before you get too much further, and make sure it is scaled right. Now, I know you see this camera jitter. I actually figured out what that's from, and it is from this stupid head bob script that's on our FPS player controller's main camera. You just have to expand this and select the main camera. Then you can see over here there's a head bob script. If we disable that, we will not get that jitter. And I think that no jitter is better than head bob, but if you really wanted the head bob, one day we could look at maybe instead of using this camera, we could try to use a Cinemachine camera and use some of the cool Cinemachine noise stuff for a head bob. So anyway, I say let's just get rid of that stupid head bob so that stuff doesn't jitter, at least in my video. So another thing you might notice that I did is I set my character up so that it is right in front of the door, because I really want to be able to test quickly, right? So as soon as I hit play, I can just instantly test the door. I notice sometimes I'll see students, they'll be wanting to test something and they'll have to play through like a 10-minute level to get to the one thing they want to test, and you don't want to do that. You want to set up a situation where you can quickly test and iterate, and then, you know, undo that little test setup or go back to your real scene and set everything up how it actually needs to be placed. But don't be afraid to move stuff around to make testing faster for you. Now let's go ahead and make another ProBuilder cube to start to create the actual door that will fit inside of this doorway. So I will go ahead and hit Control-Shift-K once more, and let's see, where is this cube? It's like out in the middle of nowhere. So if you actually focus the camera on something, so I'll just select this door frame and hit F while my mouse cursor is in the scene window here and focus the camera view on it. Then if I hit Control-Shift-K, the ProBuilder shape tool will put the cube in a more reasonable starting spot, and I'll just leave it the 1 by 1 by 1 cube, and we'll go ahead and build it. And now we want to sort of organize it or reshape it so that it fits in the door. So if you remember our door, it is a 1/2 meter wide, or deep, I guess you would call it. You can see, yeah, total depth 0.5. So this is a 0.5 meter distance. So right now with our grid on 1, we don't have the fidelity or resolution we need on our grid to make this cube small enough to fit and be smaller than that. So I'm going to use the minus button here. The plus and minus are the hotkeys to change the grid size, and it's nice, it keeps it like it just reduces by half or multiplies it by 2 every time, depending on whether you press plus or minus. And I'll just keep everything really well aligned and organized if you use that. So I'm going to hit minus at least until I get down to 0.25, and I'm going to select the face tool here, select a face on this and drag, and it should be snapping. So that gets it lined up perfect, but I actually want my door to be thinner than the door frame. So if I go one more, it's like, that's not so bad. So that would be half. But actually, I'm going to try and get it even thinner, because I'll show you why in a minute. But basically, it has to do with if this door swings open, the thinner it is, the less likely it'll start clipping into the door frame. So I'm going to hit the minus key to make my grid size even smaller, and go one more. So let's try this. So this would be the 0.125 width here. And I may even wind up making it smaller, we'll see. But at this point, I want to line up my door so it's in the middle of the door frame. So I'll show you how to do that, but I'm starting to notice an issue where everything in my scene is white and it's becoming difficult. Like when I start to look down an axis, it's like gonna all kind of blend together. And so I'm gonna start using vertex colors to make things stand out and easier to work with. So first let's go ahead and get our floor. I'm gonna select my floor. I'm gonna select the whole object so the whole floor is painted. And I'm going to choose the vertex color option in the Pro Builder window here, and that just pops up this little palette. I'm going to go ahead and make the floor like this gray color, and then I'm going to select the door frame, not the canvas but the door frame, and let's go ahead and rename this. Instead of door, I'm going to name it door frame, just for the time being at least, so that it's different from this cube, which I will go ahead and right now name door. Okay, and so we'll make the door frame like a different color also. So I'll choose vertex colors and maybe make it like this reddish color, or maybe this purple. I don't know, something that stands out, up to you. Now this will also help with gray boxing, because when you're playtesting your levels, it'll be super clear where the doors are, which is useful for navigation. Anyway, now let's select the door itself, and I'm going to make this one like the orange color. And now it'll be a little bit easier to deal with resizing this door so it fits the door frame. So I'm going to stay in object mode here, and I'm going to look straight down this x-axis, and I'm going to choose, if you click this tiny little thing, when it has this like angular shape, you know it's in perspective mode. The camera's in perspective mode, so it just makes it's kind of nice for seeing how it'll look in a realistic view. But when you're trying to line things up, like if I look straight down the x-axis here, if you click this, you can go into this isometric view or orthographic view, and it is easier to line things up. So now with my Pro Grids on, I can see this is not centered, right? So if I move over, my grid size is too big to let me get it perfectly centered, so I'm going to hit minus to shrink the grid even further. And oh, you see, this is a good example. See how when I zoomed in with the mouse wheel, it disappeared? If you press F to refocus the camera, that will adjust that near clipping plane so you can zoom in very close without things disappearing. So if you notice things are disappearing as you zoom in on them, keep the cursor in the scene window and hit F, and then that should adjust the clipping plane on the camera so that you can get closer. Alright, so anyway, at this point I think I can adjust this to be centered, so there's 3.0625 units to the left of the door and 3 to the right of the door. And again, just always using plus and minus and not choosing some weird custom grid size will always make it easy to like just keep changing the scale and lining things up and centering things. So I really recommend that. Alright, so now this door frame is centered, but it is not high enough. So I will select my face tool, and again we can go back down this x-axis, zoom out a little bit, and I will pull it up. I'm not sure how high it actually needs to go here. That looks about right to me. Alright, and let's see, we gotta make it wide enough now. So I'm just gonna go out of isometric view and go back to this perspective, select this side and just this face, and just stretch it over until it fills up the full doorway. And so there we go. If we want to just confirm that looks right from the player's point of view, I'll run the game, and it's looking right to me. Cool. Okay, so there's the beginning of our door. One more thing we can add. Why don't we go ahead and add a doorknob? And as I do that, let's kind of think about it. For now, I want to only put a doorknob on the front of the door, or on the side of the door that the player will see when they open it. Because if you remember our design doc, the door can only only opened once, and it will always swing away from the player. So in order to make that easy, I'm going to just design my game so that the player can only be on one side of the door when they open it. So that's a little bit of a design constraint, and we can add more code to make that more flexible. But for now, I'm going to indicate which side the player can be on to open it by putting the doorknob on that side. And so to figure that out, let's click our door frame here, and let's look at it. Where is the front of the door? Now you might be wondering about that, but if you choose the move tool and then go back to object mode here, so the front of the door is the front of anything you have selected is this blue arrow, the z-axis. The direction that's pointing would be the front. So if I clicked it on my player, you can see his blue arrow is pointing at the door. So that's the front direction of or the forward vector of my player. That's which way it's facing. You can confirm that by quickly looking in the game window to see that's which way we're facing. And so my door is actually facing the player right now. And you want to make sure this is actually only true if you have this set on local up here. So as long as that's local, these move widget handles will be showing me the up direction for that particular game object that's selected, the forward direction, the right direction, and you can see it's different based on whatever I've selected. But if I were to click this and toggle it to global, now it kind of becomes more like north, south, east, west. So you'll see now that is going to line up the same as here. So this is the world's forward, which maybe we could think of as like north or something. So you can see that, the global, north, south, east, and west don't change based on which object we have selected. It's only things like forward, right, and left that change. Anyway, I want to go back to the local so I can see each individual object, which way it's facing. Alright, so this is the front of my door. So let's go ahead and put the doorknob here. If that's not the front of your door, you could rotate it. So I mean it's not essential, but I think it makes sense to just keep things organized like this. So anyhow, I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-K and make another cube. I'll just build this thing, and let's scale it down quite a bit. I'll move it over in front of my door, and I'm not literally going to scale it. I'm going to just move the faces until it's smaller and looks a little bit like a door knob. It's not going to be literally exactly like a doorknob, but it's going to help, in terms of a gray box, it'll be good enough. Maybe I'll make my grid one more smaller with the minus key and get even tinier here. That looks kind of reasonable. So let's go back to the object mode of this cube, and boy, its pivot is all screwed up, so I'll show you something quickly. If I select, well, let's just click on this and then choose center pivot. We're going to be messing with pivots real soon, so we might as well get started. So I'll click that, and now, since I drastically resized that cube, its pivot, its point of origin was kind of all screwed up. So I just wanted to recenter it so it's actually feels like it's connected to the object. Okay, so we want that to be, kind of lined up with what the player's view looks like, where it ought to be. So I can just run the game and kind of see if it seems like it's too high or too low. It seems maybe okay. Maybe I'll go ahead and make it a little tiny bit smaller still. So let me select this face. There it is. Cool. Go back to object mode. Now let's get it lined up with the door. So I'm going to look straight down the x-axis here. Go into isometric view, and you can see kind of how far out in front of the doorknob is, which, by the way, I'm going to leave the doorknob white just for more contrast. And so I'm okay with the doorknob either being perfectly flush with this, or I could even take it in just a tiny bit. So I could like reduce my graph or my grid again and move it about like so. I'm gonna just get my grid back to 1 before I forget about it. Go back to perspective mode and kind of see how this looks. Run the game and just really double check everything makes sense to me. Cool. And you'll notice the door frame that ProBuilder makes, it has no faces on these sides. That's because there's meant to be walls there. So you're going to insert this door into your hallways or rooms and essentially build around the door. So you don't need that extra geometry there. That would just be kind of like a waste. So that's why it's like that. So I wouldn't bother trying to like connect these faces to make that not able to be seen through, because we'll actually have walls in our real game that won't let me like stand here to see that there's no geometry. So I wouldn't worry about that. Okay, cool. So this is looking good to me. Let's start thinking about what's next. I suppose the next thing we ought to do is sort of figure out how this door can open. And when we do that, before we start doing that, we're going to have to actually set up some things. So I need to make sure that the door knob actually rotates along with the door. You'll see like if I start rotating this door, the doorknob stays, so that's not good. So I'm just going to first of all rename the doorknob so that we can remember that this is the door knob, and I'm going to make it a child of the door by just dragging it up onto this game object. And so now if we rotate the door, the knob comes with it. Now you'll notice as I rotate this door, it is not turning, it's not swinging the way I'd expect a door to open. I want to have like a normal sort of swinging door, so I'll just go back and zero out this rotation I've been doing. I was just using the rotate tool here. So the problem is, again, has to do with the pivot point. So in Unity, things will rotate around their pivot point. So I need to change the pivot point. If you're using ProBuilder, you can do this by like going into vertex mode and selecting a vertice and then choosing set pivot. So that's one way we could do this. So let's see, I can select, you want to select, since this door is going to rotate away from the player when the player's here, I think it makes sense to choose this vertice in the back of the door as its pivot point. Again, that will just help make sure the door doesn't clip through the door frame once it swings open. So once you have the vertice selected, you can use the move tool to make it easier to see that you have it selected. You just want to choose set pivot here, wherever that was. There we go. So it's hard to tell that maybe it did anything, but we can confirm it. If we just go back to object mode, you'll see that now the origin of the object is that vertice. And so now if we test what rotation looks like, the hotkey for the rotate tool is E. So I just hit E. W is move, E is rotate. You can see these up here changing, move, rotate. Now it's kind of swinging how we might expect a door to open, right? Cool. And so you can see I I'll show you what I meant by having the door clip through the door frame. If I open this sort of too far, you can tell it's clipping through the door frame now. I can really make it obvious. Something like that is clearly not right. When you have your placeholder geometry, like your gray box geometry like this, it's a little harder to notice this is a problem. But if this look was like real art, you would clearly see the door was like clipping through, like it would be clear that wood was somehow pushed through cement or something, or drywall, and it wouldn't look right. So basically there's a max to how far we ever want to open this door, and that's based on clipping. So something like that. Anyway, we'll get to that. For now, let's just go back in here, the rotation Y, and hit 0. Again, if you ever need to figure out what rotation you're supposed to be dealing with, I would recommend you just grab the rotate tool here and test and look and see how things change in the inspector. And that's not how, if I was doing a drawbridge, that's how it would go. So that's how you can rotate a drawbridge, but I want it to go like this, so you can see that is changing the rotation Y. So I'll just hit 0, and now my door is closed again. Cool, so the pivot is all set up now. I'm actually going to go ahead and make my door a child of the door frame, just to keep everything organized. And then I'm going to make sure I save my scene in case something horrible happens and I don't lose too much work. And now I think it's time to start thinking about animating the door. So in order to animate things in Unity, you want to use, there's two main windows to start thinking about. One, well, so nowadays in 2018.3 they've organized everything into this animation category. So you go to Window from the main Unity window, or I'm sorry, the main Unity menu, and then choose Animation. The first thing I want to look at will be this animation window, and for me at least it's coming in down here at the bottom, and that's how I would like to have it. And you can see it says to begin animating door frame, create an animator and an animation clip. I actually don't want to animate the door. Well, I could animate the door frame because the door is actually part of the door frame, but I'm just going to go straight to the source and click on the door itself. And, excuse me, and while my door game object is selected, this is what I want to create an animator for. So to create an animator, that's actually a component. So while you have the door selected, we can hit Add Component, start typing animator, and you'll see it here. So don't add animation, you want to add animator. These are easy to get mixed up because they sound so similar. So just choose animator carefully. Alright, so now we have the animator component. This is really the key to animating things in Unity, so make sure you add that component. And once you have that, we can start messing with this animation window. So now it just says to begin animating door, create an animation clip. And there's a handy create button. So just be very certain that you have door selected in the hierarchy. Make sure your door has an animator component. And then in the animation window here, you can hit create. So again, if you don't have the animation window, it's just window, animation, and then choose animation. So animation window, animator component. And you might see we have this animator thing here. I'm just going to even close this for now just to minimize confusion until we need it, which we will soon. But for now, animation window, animator component, door is selected. Now we can finally click this create button to create an animation clip for our door. Now, animations are a separate type of asset, so we want to go into our assets directory here and create a new folder for this category of asset called animation. This is again just the best practice to keep your project organized. So inside of the animation folder I just made, which needs to be in your assets directory, we will make a new animation. And let's just go ahead and call this door open. So I think it's a good idea when you're naming animations to name, like, include in the name what the object in question is. So in this case, the object we're animating is a door. And then next is the actual animation. So we'll describe what the animation is, and this is going to be the door opening. So that's why I'm calling this door open. I suppose if you wanted, maybe you could do something like this door. So it's like this is the object, and then we could use Pascal case to do like open and close or whatever. Describe your animation like that. Either one of these is viable. Just be consistent on how you do it. So I'll go with this door underscore open for now, and so we can save this animation. And so now you can see in the animation window here we have the door open animation that we're editing with this little timeline. And in order to make an animation, we need to start by making a keyframe. So select, the 0 on the timeline here, and we're going to want to add a keyframe, but we can't yet because we actually need to tell Unity, okay, what property are we going to animate? So you can animate basically any kind of number. Like we can change any number that you can see in the inspector can pretty much be changed in an animation. So it's pretty neat. You could do things like change colors, you can change scale, you can change rotation, position, lots of different things. In this case, we know we want to animate this rotation Y. So I'm going to choose add property transform, and you can see like I could, if I wanted, I could like turn the doorknob on and off in an animation, lots of different things. I could make mesh renderers visible, change their shaders, many things. But anyway, I'm looking for the rotation component or rotation property of my transform component, and I can add that there, and then you'll see now I can start animating the rotation of my door. But I'll show you another little trick that's kind of interesting. I'm just going to remove that property. Let's say I wasn't really sure again if it's rotation whatever. If you choose this this record button, now anything I do in the inspector will create a property and start animating it. So you want to be careful that you know when this is and isn't clicked, because you can see, for example, if I wanted to turn the collider on and off in an animation, I can check that, and you can see now I can start turning that on and off based on a timeline in this animation. That is not what I want. I will remove that. I actually want to rotate the rotation Y. So you can see that's all red. That's helping me understand that I'm recording this, meaning this translation I just made is saved to the timeline in this keyframe. So this keyframe is tracking that value there. So that's another way to just sort of automatically add a property, is to just hit the record button and then change whatever, and the animation window will just automatically add that property. I'll remove it and just do it the other way one more time so you can see them both. So I'm going to turn off record so I don't do anything crazy, and I can just manually click to add the rotation property. So anyway, just two different ways of doing the same thing. So once I've added that rotation property, you see we have these, it gave us automatically two timelines, or I'm sorry, two keyframes. So there's one at 0 here, and for me, there's one all the way over here at 1 second. All right, so because this says 60 samples here, this is 0 seconds, and that's 1 second. You can read all about Unity animation if you want to figure out, like changing this can adjust the sort of scale of your timeline. But I'm just going to leave it be for the time being. And if you want to learn more about the nuances of this animation interface, I will go ahead. If you go to the Unity tutorials section and scroll down, there's a whole section on animation, and I can link this. Oh, I accidentally enabled the new Unity tutorial interface here, so let me just open this in an incognito window. Unity 3d.com/learn. Oops. Tutorials, animation. All right, here we go, and it won't just jump away from me. I'll add this link to the notes so you can sort of see, if you're curious, exactly how all this stuff works. All right, so there we go. There's the link in the notes if you are interested in learning more about the details. Anyhow, what we need to do is just leave this on 60. You want one keyframe at 0, one keyframe at 1 second. And now I can adjust. If I were to go over here to where, so if you select the timeline at 1 second here, and if you don't have a keyframe at 1 second, these blue diamonds are the keyframes. If you don't have a keyframe, you can click this button to add a keyframe wherever you have selected on the timeline. So if I were to add, if I click here at 1/10 of a second, and well, that's not necessarily 1/10 of a second, but anyway, if you click where it says 10 here, 0, 10, and add a keyframe, you can add a keyframe there. When it's selected in blue, that means it's selected, so I could select this one, or I could select this one, and then I'm going to hit delete and delete that one I don't want. But I want one at 0 and one at 1 second for now. And I'm going to sort of move the timeline to the 1 second here, so click over here, and I'm going to change the value of the rotation Y. Now, I don't necessarily know, I could start typing numbers like 20. I don't know if that's what I want. That's not even the right direction. I want it to rotate away from the player when they're standing here. So I could try -20. And the bottom line is I'm not really sure what the right number is. So if I actually move my mouse cursor here, or again, I could do it here. But I'll just move my mouse cursor here in the margin and click and drag. And just kind of keep dragging until it seems about like what I might want, because again, I don't know the exact number. I'm going to find out the exact number. I can even use this rotate tool to find it. So here you can see it looks like I want to find right where it starts clipping. So maybe like right around here. So like -90, basically. That makes sense, huh? So let's type in -90 in our animation for this keyframe that's at the end. And now you'll see, well, it didn't quite take here. -90, enter. It's not cooperating. Maybe I just need to not be sort of selecting stuff in the inspector while I deal with the typing that number in. So yeah, I just totally threw away all my stuff. So click on the door. I will tell you that I believe that this is a finicky tool, so you need to be pretty careful about how you use it and save often. But anyway, I will select this 1 second on this keyframe at 1 second. Select rotation Y, and I'm going to type -90, and I'm going to hit enter, and presumably that is now saved. Animations should save automatically, so if you have to kind of be careful, because that's kind of bad. If you do something wrong, it'll save it as soon as you do it, so just be careful. Anyway, let's hit this play button, and as long as our door is selected and everything's good, if I hit play, it should preview the animation. That is definitely not what I want it to do, right? So something weird's going on. What is the value that's recorded here? So at 0, you can see it says rotation Y is -90. I don't want that. At 0, it should be 0. There's no rotation. At 1 second, it should be -90, which I swear I typed 10 times and somehow isn't working. So we can keep trying. I wonder if it's because the playhead has to be, so I'm going to make sure that the playhead here, so click on 0 and then select this keyframe. 0 seconds, the rotation Y should be 0. 1 second, I'll move the playhead over here, select the keyframe and change the value to -90. And I think lo and behold it may work. Let's hit play. Yay! There's our door opening. So you can see how finicky it is. It's just because I wasn't being careful about how I was using it. So make sure you click on the timeline where you want to change the value, and then select the keyframe and then change the value. And it's kind of finicky, like I said, but if you do it precisely, it will work for you. Anyway, so again, if I look at it from the player's point of view here and I hit play, I just want to make sure it's doing what I expect. So now I know my animation is good. This would be a good point, since it's working, to save everything, save scene, save project, and I would maybe make a commit just in case you accidentally mess up your your animation going forward. Alright, so you can see by just creating these two keyframes with data, so this 0 seconds keyframe tells me where the door starts, the 1 second keyframe tells me where the door ends. Unity is interpolating in between those two keyframes, or tweening, to create this animation. If I think that this is too slow, so if I hit play, I'm like, maybe that's too slow, I could drag this keyframe sooner, so maybe something like 1/4 of a second here. And now let's see what it looks like. It's just faster, so you can see the whole animation is shorter now. So you can drag the keyframes around to get it, you know, the right length that you'd like. If you wanted, you could even, if you wanted to sort of open like slow at first and then fast, I could add another keyframe, so that would be very slow between like here and here, and then very fast between here and there. That's, you can really add a lot of nuances. You can even adjust, there's a curve editor. You can do, if you wanted it to not be a linear translation between these 2 points, you could do, you can adjust this curve. I don't know. Let's see what this does. That's totally awful and not what I want. So I'm just going to hit Control Z until it's back how I'd like it. If you make deliberate changes to the curve, you can make it customized to look how you'd like. Anyway, let's go back to not the curve view, this drop sheet view. I'll just double check it's still how I want. And I do think 1 second is long. You know, players are going to be opening a lot of doors, so we should probably keep this animation fairly fast. Cool. Alright, so animation's good. Save, commit. If you were to actually run the game right now, let's kind of see what happens. So that is not what we want, right? So first of all, let's go ahead and stop the looping. So to stop the looping, if we go to our project window, go into the animations directory here, and select your door open animation that we just made, you can just uncheck this loop checkbox, and then now it at least won't loop. So there it goes. But we don't want the door to just open as soon as you start the game. We want the door to open when the player clicks it. So we have to figure out how do we trigger this animation so that it only opens at a specific time. So at this point, we need to start looking at the other window that I closed earlier. So go to Window animation, and this time we want to go to the animator window. So the animation window is for creating the actual animations. This animator window here will be for controlling the logic of, when animations transition to new animations. So select your door, and you can see the door, because we started our animation in a deliberate way by adding this animator component first, and then creating the animation in this animation window, it actually automatically created this asset called an animation controller. You can see it here. It says door. If I double click, it will open this thing up again. If you want to see it in the project window, you can see it's right here. This is an animation controller, door.controller. And that animation controller is assigned to our door. And that sort of setup happened automatically when we started our animation, when we made the first animation, just because we did it in the correct workflow where you made the animator component first and then made the animation. You can also see that we have this sort of node in this flowchart that says door open. It's named just after our animation. And if you select that little node, you'll see that it has our animation set into the motion property here. So entry means when the game first starts, or when this asset first loads, it will go straight to this state, door open. And that's not really what we want. We want it to start off closed. So right off the bat, I guess we better make an animation for the door being closed. And then that's gonna be what we want to be the default starting animation. So let's go back to our scene window, select the door again, go back to this animation window, and then you'll see right here where it says door open. If you select this drop down, you can choose create new clip, and we're gonna make a new animation. Again, make sure you're in your animation directory here. And let's call this one door_closed, and I will save it. Okay, so the door closed animation, it's actually going to be simpler than the door open animation. I don't need multiple keyframes, because the door closed animation, our game is not going to actually have a closing animation. It's just going to be like, you can almost think of it as an idle pose for the door while it's closed. So it just needs to look exactly like this. So all I need to do is add the rotation Y property again and leave it at 0. And I don't even need multiple keyframes. So I'm going to delete the second keyframe here. This should just only be one keyframe at 0, 0, 0 that just has zeros for all of the rotation information. So if I hit play, it should just look like this. Looks like nothing. It's just closed. That's the animation playing right now. It's even looping, but it doesn't matter because it's just one frame, so it's alright. Now just to see in contrast, if you look at door open and play, there it goes. I'm going to pause it in the middle of the animation there so that you can see when I go back to door closed, there's door closed. Alright, so now if I go back to the animator window here, you'll see that I have this door closed node in this little flowchart, and it has the door closed animation associated with it. Now I can actually right click here and make new states and assign whatever animation I want, but when you first create an animation, it goes ahead and automatically makes a state for that animation if you want. If you don't want to use it, you could delete it. If you accidentally delete it, you could make a new one, call it the same thing, and assign the right motion. So it's not like you're screwed if you accidentally delete one of these. Anyway, I want this one to be the default, not open. So if you right click on door closed, you can choose set layer default state. And now you can see this orange one here is the default. So when this asset loads, it goes straight to door closed. So we can preview that in the game by running, and now the door should just be closed forever. And so the new question is, okay, my door is starting off with the closed animation. How do I make it open? Well, there's always multiple ways to do things, but the way I want to show you is going to be by adding an animation parameter. So I'm going to drag the animator tab down here because at this point I want to sort of show you that while the game is running, if you select an animated object, so I'm going to hit escape so I get my cursor back and select my door, you can see a live preview of its animation controller, and you can see it's actually just looping the door closed animation right here over and over and over. So that's what my door is doing. So anyway, while you have this animator window open, go ahead and stop. Make sure your game's stopped, because sometimes things don't save when you change them while the game is running. And we're going to go ahead and choose this parameters tab here, and then click the plus button, and we're going to add a new bool animation parameter. And so it'll be a true false thing. That's what bool is, and I'm going to call it lowercase s should open. So basically we're creating a parameter that if it becomes true, we want to transition from door closed to open. So in my mind, the word should open, it's a yes or no question, so that's always the rule I want to use to name bools. And this clearly tells me if should open is true, then we ought to transition from closed to open, right? So that's why I named it that way. So in order to make that transition, I just right click, choose make transition, and then I can connect it to whatever. I'm just going to connect it to open. Before I do anything else, I want to show you what happens now. Watch, when I run the game, it'll start an entry, it'll go to door closed, it'll play once, so you see that little blue line, that blue bar will fill up, and then it'll transition to door open, and we'll see our animation play. So go ahead and watch what that looks like. There it is. Now remember, door open we set to not loop, so that's why the blue bar isn't like continuously filling up and emptying over and over. It's because that one's not looping. Door closed is okay if it loops because it's only one frame, so you don't see anything really changing. Alright, so now what I need to do is add a condition to this transition. So I stopped the game, I selected the transition, it'll turn blue when it's selected, and I can then in the inspector here create a new condition so that this transition will only happen when the condition is met. So I hit the plus button. You can see right off the bat it's because we only have one parameter, which is should open, and the default is true. So it says if should open is true, then we will go ahead and do this transition. So this, until this condition is met, we will not transition to door open. So because nothing is ever going to change the value of should open right now, the door is going to start enclosed and just loop enclosed forever until someone changes this checkbox to true. So you can see, I'll kind of try to position the camera so you can watch. You can actually, while the game's running, change these by clicking them or assigning a value if it's not a bool, and you'll see what the animation does. So you can debug animations this way before you start writing code to control it. So if I check this box, you'll notice that now all of a sudden the condition was met, should open is true, so it went from this state down into door open, and the door opened. So that is the behavior we want. Now make sure that when you stop the game, make sure that should open starts unchecked, because we want the door to start closed. And now we just have to figure out how do we make this checkbox get checked when the player tries to open the door. So in order, you know, when we want to do functionality, that's when we want to write a script. So let's go to our scripts folder, right click, create C# script, and I'm just going to call this door. And I will, once it's done creating that script, I'll just double click it to open it in Visual Studio. Alright, here we are in our brand new door script. I'm going to delete start and update because you never know when we need it and when we don't. And I don't want to have empty methods left in my script unless I'm using them. And so what I want my door to do is when the player clicks it, I want to change the value of this checkbox, this should open parameter on my door's animator. Remember your door, way back when we added this animator component? Well, this is sort of the visual representation of that. And so when we want to change a thing with this animator, that means we need a reference to the animator component in our script. So our door needs a reference to the animator. So we'll say private animator. That's the type of the thing we need. And then we'll just call it animator with the lowercase a. You can see that's even a suggested name. Just use the arrow keys to toggle through these suggestions, and then when I have the one I want, I can hit enter or tab, or in this case I'm going to hit semicolon because that's the next character I want. So private animator, okay. The lowercase a animator is the name of the thing. The uppercase one is the class name. This is my instance, that's my class. So now I need to initialize this. At this point, I can't use this variable until I initialize it. And so a good spot to initialize variables is in the start method. So I'll just let autocomplete give me a private void start. And in here, I want to say, actually, you know what? Let's just use awake instead. I think it's a good habit to actually, when you're going to use get component to initialize something like we're about to, let's go ahead and do that in awake, which just happens a little bit earlier than start. And so inside of this awake method, we will say animator with the lowercase a equals get component, angle brackets, and then the type of the component we want is animator. And again, since we're trying to reference the actual type here, we use the capital A animator. And then open close parenthesis because that's the syntax for all your methods in C#, and then finally semicolon at the end. And so when the level loads, it's going to set the animator equal to get component animator. And remember, get component just searches the game object for a component of that type and then plugs it back into that variable. So now I can do things with this animator, and it will actually it'll know what thing I'm trying to do stuff to. In this case, it's the animator that's attached to this game object. I say this game object, but actually now that I think about it, the door script is not on the door yet. So let's make sure we've saved our door script, and before I forget, let's go ahead and make sure that we've added the door script to the door game object. Don't add it to the door frame, add it to the door itself here, because that's the object that has the animator component on it. And so get component will search this object for an animator. And another thing we can do, just since we know that this will only work if there's an animator component on this on the game object that this script is on, we can remember the attribute to require a component. So just before the name of the class here, you can say require component, open parentheses, lowercase type of, open parentheses, and then the type that we need is an animator, right? And that'll just make sure if anyone ever drags a door onto a new game object, it will automatically add an animator component. And it just also kind of expresses, this is expressing that this thing needs an animator component. So it's a little more clear. All right. So now, when do we want to actually do something with this animator? Well, it should be when the player walks up to it and clicks it. Remember, if we go run our game, we have these interactive objects, right? So like this one's playing a sound, these are toggling things, right? So this is pretty much, if we recall our design doc, this is a lot of the functionality we want for the door, right? I can bring that back up. It's when the player looks at an interactive door, display text shows a message. You click the door, which is our interact button right now. It plays a sound and does a thing. So basically, I think that means it would be smart to make our door actually inherit from the interactive object class, which, remember, the interactive object class is an iInteractive, and so it's bringing in all this functionality, much of which we already need. So I'm going to, remember, you can only inherit from one class, so I'll go ahead and inherit from interactive object. Door will inherit from interactive object instead of mono behavior. But we don't lose the mono behavior stuff because interactive object actually inherits from mono behavior. So we still have mono behavior up at the top of our inheritance tree. So now that the door is inheriting from an interactive object, if I save and go back to Unity and click on the door, we should see a little bit different stuff in the interface here. In fact, actually, because our doors, remember that interactive object requires an audio source. So I just want to show you, if I were to have made the door extend from interactive object before I added that script, you'll see that it automatically adds an audio source. So in any event, make sure that your door game object has the door script, and it's also going to need an audio source now, because that's required by interactive object. Okay, so you can notice that now we have this display text, and so door is already sort of doing part of what we want it to do. If I run the game and I look at it, it's telling me the name of the, well, it's telling me the display text, interactive object, when I look at the door, right? I could probably just change the display text in the editor here to say door, but I probably want every door to have a default display text that says door instead of interactive object. So there's kind of a trick to doing that. You'll notice in our interactive object class here, we are giving the display text an initial value here, a default value, and it's protected, which means we can access display text in children. So if I go to the door, like say inside a start here, I can look at the display text and set it equal to stuff. But if I want it to start that way, I would need to initialize it up here, and you'll see that like display text is not a choice in IntelliSense. You can't override fields like that. But one trick that you can do to make it so that our door will just automatically come in with default display text that's customized is we can write a constructor. So in non-Unity C# world, you use constructors a lot, and it's like whenever you create a new instance of an object of a class, you call its constructor, and it allows you to initialize it. And you do that by writing the constructor. So we just say public door, which is the name of the class. So public name of the class, and then you sort of use the syntax as though you were writing a method, something like this. So open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. Let me fix my indent. Shift tab moves left, tab moves the indent right. Alright, anyway, here's my constructor. So whenever you make a new door, the code inside of here gets called. In fact, I can add a comment, so a summary. So 3 slashes, and Visual Studio gets the summary tag, and I can say that using a constructor here to initialize display text in the editor. So anyhow, in Unity we actually aren't calling constructors a lot. You may have noticed that. And the reason is that most of the time, or often at least, we're initializing stuff by creating game objects in the editor and then dragging scripts on them, right? So whenever I run the game, most of my mono behaviors, which are the things that are on game objects, are just automatically being initialized when the game starts because they're mono behaviors that are on game objects, and that's just how Unity works. But they do, under the hood, have a constructor, and we can put code in there. So I can say something like display text equals name of door, because that just makes sure this. I could do like this, but that would be like a magic string, and that opens the door for me to have a typo. So I'm going to say name of, and then use the type door. So that way there's just no way. Gets checked at compile time. If this is wrong, it won't compile. So I know that I'll never have a typo. Anyway, now if I save the game, again, I'm going to have to delete my existing door script because the default values will not, changing the default value will not change existing instances. It'll only change new instances. So actually I don't need to delete it. I can just right click and hit reset. I was going to remove it and re-add it, but actually if I hit reset here, that will do the same thing. And now it actually says door, which is pretty cool. So now anytime I make a new door, because of this constructor, it will automatically change the display text, which is a field inside of interactive object. For the door, the display text will initialize as the name of the class door, which is cool, I think. Anyway, if nothing else, this was worth just thinking a little bit about how constructors work in Unity. And now we can start thinking about, again, where do we put our code that our whole goal here is to check this box in code. So where do we put that code? Let's think again, with interactive object, the way it works from our iInteractive interface. iInteractive, it has a display text and an interact with method. So you can see the interactive object has an interact with function inside of it, and it's already virtual, which means we can override it in children. So if we go to the door, we can say public. It has to be public because that is the access modifier of anything in an interface like this. So once I type public override, which is the keyword to let C# understand I'm trying to override an existing function in my parent class, there's only a few choices. These are the only virtual, you can only override methods that are marked virtual, and so that's why there's so few choices. And in this case, I want to override what happens whenever we call interact with, because interact with gets called automatically when the player clicks on, when they press the interact button while they're looking at an interactive object, which this is. So that means whatever code I put inside of this interact with method will get called when the player looks at the door and clicks it. And if you forgot why, you can revisit these two scripts here, detect looked at interactive and interact with looked at. Anyway, so base.interact with will just do whatever is in the base class's interact with method, which is just going to play our sound effect, which I don't have yet actually, so we'll have to get a sound effect. And then in addition to that, I want to do something with this animator. I want to say animator, lowercase a, dot set bool, which is how you set a bool animation parameter. Remember, that's what this thing is. This is a bool animation parameter. Now I type in the name of the bool anim parameter as a string, so should open, and you need to type this exactly case sensitive how it is typed in the editor here. And then the second parameter of the set bool function is the value you want to pass it, and so we will say should open is true. Oops, and semicolon. So now when I click the door, it will set that bool to true, and we should get our door to open. So let's save this and go back to Unity, and more or less our door will be working, I think. So basically when I click the door, this you can watch it. This should get checked, and then this transition will happen and the door will open. So let's test it out. So I'm looking at the thing, it says door. I click it because that's my interact button. And oh, remember this? I forgot about this. So missing audio source component, interactive object requires an audio source component. Let's just double click this and we can see exactly where it's coming from. It's coming from here. It's trying to play this. So actually remember, if you can remember, we put this try catch in to give us a better audio or a better error message, and this error message is not super precise or accurate because we actually have an audio source. What we don't have is an audio clip. So I can add a little bit to this error message to make it more clear. We can say missing audio source component or audio clip. Interactive object requires an audio source component with an audio clip assigned. Okay, so that's more verbose. And so we need to get a sound effect for our door before it works. We just basically, the error there was we tried to play a sound effect that didn't exist, because you can see there's no audio. Oops, I clicked wrong. Anyway, there's no audio clip plugged into this door's audio source. And we tried to play something that didn't exist, so we got a null reference exception. Go to the notes here, and you can see the door sound effect I'm going to use. It's like a nice door latch, gate latch sound. There is one issue here. You'll see it has this like long lead-in of silence before the sound effect starts. If I wanted this to be really good, I'd open this in Audacity and trim this out. Actually, Audacity is another thing I should go ahead and put in the notes in case you are curious about. It's just a nice free sound editing software. So I'll throw this on the notes for you guys. Audacity. Alright, anyway, you can use Audacity if you wanted to customize a sound effect, like in this case deleting that, because what's going to happen is when I click my door, it's going to be like a little bit of a lead-in of silence before the sound plays, and that doesn't feel as responsive as we might want it. But in my case, I am being a little lazy because this is just a sample, so I'm going to download this sound effect from freesound.org. Feel free to find your own sound effect that fits your door artwork, and I'm going to drag the sound effect into my sound effects folder here. There it is. So you can see again, here it is in Unity. I'll play it. Same sound, there we go. It's kind of loud. Might change the volume. So let's go to the door. Let's drag the gate latch sound effect in to my audio clip property on the door's audio source. Again, I think this is loud. You can try it out on your own. I'm going to adjust the volume down a little because I don't want to just like deafen the player with this gate sound effect. You are free to mix the audio in your game however you like. Let's run the game and try it out. Hopefully it... Oh, I can tell a bug there. As soon as I ran the game, the audio clip played because we have play on awake selected. So uncheck play on awake. Now let's try this one more time. Alright, so I'm going to click. And oh, it's still giving me an error. What's going on? Okay, so this is kind of an interesting bug. The problem is because I chose to make this in awake instead of start, we're actually replacing the awake function that we've defined in our parent class here. So you can see in the interactive object class, this is where we're initializing the audio source. So if we skip this, we're actually never initializing an audio source. So when I try to do this, it will give us that exception. So in order to fix it, we need to do a couple things. First of all, in interactive object, remember, what we need to do basically is make this a virtual method and then override it correctly and then call base.awake. So step one, we need to make this one virtual, and you can only make, you can't make private methods virtual, so we'll make it protected, which just means that only its children have access to it. And we'll mark it as virtual, which just allows, it tells C# that children of this class are allowed to override this method. Now in door, over here we can mark this one as protected and then designate that it's an override. And now we have access to call base.awake, which, if you remember, I'm going to select this. If I hit F12, it'll take me to the definition of that. Or you could right click and hit go to definition. And so what does the base awake do? It initializes the audio source. So that's why this wasn't working. It's because we were hiding the other awake function and therefore not calling its audio source get component audio source. Now that we've actually set it up to be an actual override in the child class, we can call the base awake and then do our own stuff, and now life will be good again. So again, if you want to see that, we had to make this one protected virtual void awake, and then in our door we had to make it protected override void awake and then call the base.awake, and that way both awakes will get called and everything will be initialized. And now when I run the game, I finally think our door is going to open and play a sound effect. Yay! So that's working. There's still one last little issue, and that is I can repeatedly click the door even though it's already open. And remember, at this point in my game, I just want the doors to be single use, just to avoid situations. I'll show you what I mean. Let's start the game over and see what happens if I stand on the other side of the door and click it. So here's the no zone. Let's see what happens if I click it. Well, it actually didn't cause a catastrophic bug. It just clipped the door through me, which is a lot better than like getting stuck in the door, or sometimes you'll see stuff where the collider on the door will push the player like into a wall or through a wall, and then you get all kinds of nasty bugs. So my thought is, for now, let's just circumvent all of those bugs by only letting the door open from one direction and only be used once. So at this point, since the door doesn't do anything, I don't want it to be able to be reactivated anymore. It should sort of work like this, where you can't click it again and the text goes away, so we don't get led into believing that we can click it more. And I should also point out that if your game is like sci-fi game, or you can come up with any other way of doing a door besides swinging, like if you can make the door go straight up or like open like curtains, that is gonna totally circumvent this whole swinging door bug potential of knocking the player around through walls, and it's way easier. So the easiest way to deal with this would just to be come up with a different type of door. But assuming you would like a swinging door, this is how we're gonna do it. Alright, so I need the door to only be able to be opened once. So what I'm gonna do, I should mention that really, when I think about it, it's probably a good idea. It would have been a good idea to make this is reusable stuff that we did for toggle set active. Actually just build it straight into the interactive object base class. But I don't want to deal with that right now since this video is already getting long. So I'm just going to do it the quickest, easiest way I can think of right off the bat. And so we're going to make a bool variable, a bool field here, private bool is open, and that is going to track whether or not the door is open. Bools initialize as false. If you wanted, you could be super clear about it, because it's important whether this starts true or false. And we can then say when you interact with the door, we will go ahead and say that the is open equals true, and we will only do all of this stuff if is open is false. So in other words, if not is open. And so I gotta add curly brackets because I want to do multiple lines of things. So I'll select these lines and hold Alt and move them up here, and then hit Tab to fix the indent, then down arrow key and Control left arrow key, and then backspace. And now everything is looking good. There's one last thing I need to remember to do. So before we set is open to true, I want to go ahead and change the display text. So display text equals string.empty, which will then make it not show up anymore. There'll be no text. So when you look at this, once it's open, you will not see any display text any longer. So it won't trick people into thinking they can do stuff over and over, and it won't play the sound effect over and over because it only does that if it's not open. All right, let's test this. So I saved it. Let's go to Unity. Let's run the game. Now, I should note that the only reason my door can only be opened from this direction is going to be because of my level design. So if you set it up so the player can get to the door from this side, they'll be able to open it from this side. But at this point, I'm going to be crafty with my level design and shield myself from bugs by designing the level with these constraints, so that you can only reach a door for the first time from one particular side, and that way the door always swings open opposite of the player. Now it is totally doable to write code in a way that we figure out which way the player is relative to the door and then open the door opposite of that direction. That's totally doable, but it's just a little bit more advanced than I want to get into right now, where I was just kind of wanting to scratch the surface of animation and controlling animation and script in Unity. But anyhow, you see the text went away and the door opened and played the sound, so we're doing well. Just a couple last notes and then we're gonna call this video done. I'm gonna stop the game here. Now at this point, functionality wise, the door is pretty much working, so you feel free to not do any of this next stuff, but I want to take an opportunity to at least show you a couple more things you can do. So first of all, if you click on your door and you go back to the animation window here and go back to your door open. So remember, door closed is just one frame, right? If we hit play, it's always on this 0 frame. Door open is multiple frames, right? It's actually possible to make the door open animation a single frame. So again, this works as it is, so I don't feel like you need to do this. But what I'm going to actually do is delete this starting frame here, the one where the door is starting closed, and I'm going to grab the frame where the door is open, so the rotation Y is at -90, and I'm going to drag this all the way to 0, so this is actually the only frame of our animation. And now if I hit play, I have just a single frame doors open animation, and then my door closed is a single frame closed animation. And the thing I want to point your attention to is that in the animator here, this transition is able to interpolate from this state to that state. So you can handle animations simply by transitioning between two states. So this is the door all the way closed, this is the door all the way open, and you can see if I select the transition, this little blend here is gonna be the transition. So watch what happens when I run the game. I'm gonna click the door, and it seemingly does exactly the same thing. It's just doing it differently. If you're doing simple animations that just need to translate between two states, I think this is a smart way to do it with just single keyframes. Also, you might be noticing if your animation feels a little like non-responsive, like you click the door and it takes a minute, you want to uncheck this exit time thing. That will make it instant. The issue is if you leave exit time, it means that it's going to wait a little bit for the previous animation to finish before it plays the next one. And that just makes things feel slow, so we're going to uncheck exit time. And if I wanted this transition to be longer, in other words, I want my animation to take longer, I could like adjust it like this. If I wanted it to be faster, I could make it small like that. But something like this, I don't know, this felt pretty good to me. We'll just try it again. Yeah. And now it's really pronounced that the sound effect isn't lining up with the animation because the animation is very responsive. And remember, our sound effect had that little bit of lead in to it. So I would open Audacity and trim that out, and it would feel really good. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is just a small optimization, and I just want to make sure you understand what it is when you see it, because you'll probably see it if you look at samples with animation. And the issue here is that rather than passing this in as again like a magic string, we can actually use a built-in Unity function called the animator.string to hash, which will convert this from a string to an int variable. And it's A, gets rid of the magic string here, and B, it makes it faster. It's a little more performant or optimized. So we can make a private int, and I'm going to call it should open anim parameter. And this is one of the few times you'll catch me using an abbreviation, but I think that's pretty clear. And it's already long. So I named it after the exact name of the animation parameter. If I really wanted to, I guess I could just name it literally the same name, but then I think it may be a little confusing that this is actually meant to be an anim parameter and nothing else. So I like to have anim parameter in there. There's a little bit of a trade-off. So if I do it like this, I have to set it equal to this magic string should open. But if I oops, I typed should twice. That's totally not right. Anyway, remember should open is just coming from this right here. Anyway, so should open anim parameter, or it's an int. I can't set an int to a string, so the trick to make this work equals, you have to say animator, or is it animation? I can't remember. Nope, animator. Animator dot string to hash, and then you pass in the string that is matching our parameter name. Alright, anyway, then right here, instead of using the string, we can use that int parameter, and you'll see this because again it's an optimization. But you could, if you wanted to try a different approach, I could just call this literally should open, and then I could use the fancy name of operator here, name of should open, and that will give me a string that is exactly the same as the name of this variable. And so now I have no magic strings, and I would have to update this to match, and that's kind of cool. But like I said, my concern about this is someone may look at this member, this field, and think that it does something that's more than just being an anim parameter reference. Like we don't want anyone to ever change the value of this or do anything with it, so I might actually prefer to say should open anim parameter, just to clarify that. And if you rename a variable, you can hit control period and it'll rename it in all the spots. And now I have to actually change this. Well, I guess if I want to get the best of both worlds, I could leave it like this, and I could go over here and name this should open anim parameter. How about that? There we go. Anim parameter. And now I have the best of both worlds, where it says anim parameter in its name, and we're still using name of. How about that? Okay, so let's just double check it and just totally break everything. And so sure enough, it worked. Cool. All right, that's it. There's our door opening. Coming up next, we'll start thinking about expanding the functionality of the door with like locks and keys and stuff like that.